There are moments in your life that divide everything into before and after. Before that Monday. After that Monday. I remember exactly what I was doing when my wife walked out of our house for the last time. I was in the garage, changing the oil on my truck. Something I'd done 1,000 times. Something ordinary. Something that made the whole world feel like it was exactly where it was supposed to be. I heard the front door close, not slam. Just close. The way it always did. And I didn't think anything of it. I didn't know she had 2 suitcases in the trunk of her car. I didn't know she'd already transferred $187. 000 out of our joint savings account at 7:43 that morning. I didn't know she'd been planning this for 14 months. I didn't know any of it. I just kept working on my truck, hands covered in oil, thinking about what I was going to make for dinner. That was a Monday. On Tuesday morning, my oncologist called. My name is Richard. I'm 61 years old. I'm a retired civil engineer. I spent 34 years designing drainage systems, bridge supports, and infrastructure that most people drive over without ever thinking about who calculated the load capacity. I like order. I like precision. I like knowing that if you build something right, if you account for every variable, if you don't cut corners, it holds. I thought I'd built my marriage that way. I was wrong. Let me tell you about Deborah first. About who I thought she was. Because I think it matters. I don't want her to be a cartoon villain in this story. Even though what she did was genuinely villainous, she was real to me for 22 years. She was my wife. And I loved her. Genuinely. Completely. The way you love someone when you've built your whole adult life in the same direction as theirs. We met in 1999 at a work conference in Columbus, Ohio. She was in accounting, not forensic work. Just standard corporate finance for a mid-sized logistics company. I was there presenting a drainage study. She came up after my presentation. I told her that was the nicest thing anyone had ever said about a culvert system. We were married 14 months later. The early years were good. Really good. We bought a house in a suburb of Cincinnati. We traveled when we could. We tried for children and it didn't happen. Which was a grief that we processed together, or at least I thought we did. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the first crack. The first place where she went quiet in a way I didn't fully recognize as distance. By the time we were in our 50s, we had a comfortable life. I was retired. She still worked. Part-time consulting for a small investment firm. We had $187. 0 inches, a joint savings account. We had a paid-off house worth about $340. Ling ling ling. We had a home equity line of credit we'd never touched. Wat? I thought, a partnership. What I didn't have was any idea that my wife had spent the previous 14 months building a parallel life with a man she'd met at a professional development seminar in Nashville. I found out his name later. I'll just call him the Nashville Man. He was 54. He was a financial advisor. He was divorced. He had, as far as I can tell, no particular interest in anything except money and the idea that he deserved more of it than he currently had. Deborah was, for him, an opportunity. For her, and I've thought about this a lot, I think he was an escape hatch. A door she'd been eyeing for years. And he was the first one to hold it open. But I didn't know any of that on the Monday I was changing my oil. I found out about the bank account when I went online to pay a utility bill that evening. I logged into the joint account like I'd done 100 times. The balance said $214. Sanchitsi. I stared at it for probably 30 seconds. Convinced I was misreading something. Then I started going through the transaction history. 7:43 a.m. Wire transfer. 187美元. Ling, ling, ling. To an account I didn't recognize. I called Deborah's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called it again. Voicemail. I drove to the bedroom and opened the closet. Her side was mostly empty. Not completely. She'd been careful. She'd left enough behind that it didn't look ransacked. She'd left the things she didn't care about. She'd taken what mattered to her. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I didn't cry. Not yet. I was still in the phase where your brain is refusing to process the full scope of what you're seeing. Because processing it all at once would be too much. So it gives you little pieces. Wire transfer. Empty closet. Voicemail. One at a time. I called my bank first thing the next morning when they opened. A wire transfer from a joint account doesn't require both signatures. That's the thing most people don't know. Either account holder can initiate it. Deborah had transferred the money legally. Technically speaking, the bank was sympathetic. They gave me the receiving account number. That was all they could do. I had just gotten off the phone with the bank when my cell rang. It was a number I recognized, my doctor's office. I'd had a routine blood panel done 2 weeks before. Something had come back unusual. They'd done a follow-up. I went in 2 days ago for more tests. I'd honestly mostly forgotten about it because I'd had unusual markers before that turned out to be nothing. It wasn't nothing. Stage 2, non-Hodgkin lymphoma. The doctor explained what that meant. I heard the words. I understood the words. I just couldn't put them together with the morning I was currently having in any way that made sense. My wife had taken our savings and disappeared. My doctor was telling me I had cancer. It was 9:45 in the morning on a Tuesday in October. I remember thinking I need to call someone. The person I would normally call in a crisis was Deborah. So I called my sister instead. Her name is Patricia. She's 3 years older than me. 64. She spent her career as a forensic accountant, and I mean a real one. The kind who gets called in when federal regulators suspect something is wrong and need someone to find exactly where the money went. She worked cases involving insurance fraud, corporate embezzlement, estate manipulation. She retired 2 years ago and now lives in Lexington, Kentucky, about an hour and 40 minutes from my house. I told her everything in about 8 minutes on the phone. The bank account, the empty closet, the voicemail, the diagnosis. There was a silence when I finished. Then Patricia said, "I'll be there tomorrow morning. Don't touch anything financial until I get there. Don't respond to Deborah if she contacts you. And Richard, I need you to pull out every financial document in that house and put it somewhere I can access it." I said, "Patricia, I have cancer," she said. "I know. We're going to handle both things. Start with the documents." That was Tuesday. She arrived Wednesday at 8 a.m. with a laptop, a portable external hard drive, and a rolling suitcase. She walked in, hugged me for about 15 seconds. The kind of hug that doesn't require anything from you. You just accept it. And then she sat down at the kitchen table, opened the laptop, and said, "Okay, walk me through everything. I want to tell you about Patricia for a moment, because she's the reason any of this story has a good ending. She is not a warm person in the conventional sense. She doesn't make small talk. She doesn't soften bad news. She's precise and direct, and she has a mind that operates like a very clean machine. She sees patterns in numbers the way some people see patterns in faces. Instantly, intuitively, without effort. She also loves me in a way that is entirely unconditional and has been every single day of our lives. She shows up. That's her love language. She just shows up. She was about to show up in every sense of the word. The first thing she found within 48 hours was something I hadn't known existed. A home equity loan. Our home equity line of credit had never been touched. I knew that because I checked it periodically and the balance was always zero. What I didn't know was that 6 months earlier, Deborah had used the HELOC to take out a separate home equity loan, a lump sum withdrawal of $90. Zero, 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 using documents that appeared to have my signature on them. I never signed those documents. Patricia laid the papers on the kitchen table and pointed to the signature line. "Is that your signature?" she asked. I looked at it. "No." I said, "It's close, but it's not mine. The R is wrong, and I always put a small crossbar on my capital L." "I know." Patricia said, "I've been looking at your signature since you were 8 years old. Would you have caught that a forged signature on a loan document? Most people wouldn't. Most people don't know what their own signature looks like well enough to identify a skilled forgery." Deborah had apparently been practicing, which means she'd planned this specific move in advance. Which means the home equity loan wasn't impulsive. It was part of the architecture. So the real number wasn't $187. Ling ling ling. It was $277. Ling ling ling. That was the first major turn, understanding that what I thought was a bad morning was actually the final move in a year-long operation. Deborah hadn't left. She'd executed. And she'd done it with the kind of methodical patience that you only develop when you've decided what you want and you're willing to wait for the right moment. Patricia spent the next 3 weeks doing what she did for 30 years, professionally. She went through every financial document in the house. Bank statements going back 3 years. Credit card records. Tax returns. Investment account activity. She pulled the HELOC documentation and had a handwriting expert she'd worked with on previous cases evaluate the forged signature, which he confirmed in writing as not mine. She tracked the wire transfer through the receiving account number the bank had given me. Cross-referencing it with records she obtained through proper legal channels via an attorney I retained the second week. And she found things. She found that Deborah had been making small, regular cash withdrawals always under the reporting threshold for 19 months. Not $187. 000, all at once. This had been a slow, patient bleed. 200 here, 300 there. A pattern that would look like ordinary household spending to anyone, not specifically looking for it. She found that Deborah had transferred a portion of those withdrawn funds into a financial account held jointly with the Nashville man, an account opened 11 months before she left. She found that Deborah had, during the previous tax year, claimed several deductions on our joint return that were fraudulent business expenses for a consulting business that had generated almost no legitimate income. Expenses that were actually personal costs. She was routing through a business structure to reduce our tax liability in her favor. She found that the home equity loan funds the $90, 000, taken with my forged signature, had been wired in 3 installments to an account in Deborah's name alone. Over a period of 4 months. She put everything in a binder, color-coded, indexed, with a summary page at the front that laid out the timeline, the amounts, the accounts, and the relevant legal statute that each act potentially violated. Then she handed me the binder and said, "You need to take this to a divorce attorney and a district attorney." Probably in that order. If you enjoy stories like this, real people, real consequences, real justice, consider subscribing to the channel. We put out new stories every week. And this community is something special. Now, about the cancer. I want to be honest with you about what those months were like. Because I think it would be dishonest to tell only the revenge half of this story, without telling the human half. Chemotherapy is not something you can put in a binder and index. It doesn't respond to organization or preparation, or the kind of methodical precision that Patricia and I had applied to the financial investigation. It just happens to your body. And your body has to decide what it's going to do about it. Mine decided to fight. I started treatment in November. Patricia drove me to every appointment for the first 2 months. She sat in the waiting room with her laptop working. Always working. Because Patricia doesn't know how to stop, and when I came out, she would assess how I looked. Ask 2 or 3 direct questions about how I felt. And then drive me home. She didn't make it sentimental. She didn't use words like brave or strong. She just showed up. Every single time. Without being asked. Some nights I was sick. Some nights I sat in my kitchen at 2 in the morning. Too exhausted to sleep. And I thought about what 22 years of my life had actually amounted to. I thought about Deborah in Miami. Or wherever she was by then. Probably not thinking about me at all. I thought about the Nashville man with his carefully constructed financial schemes and his apparently magnetic personality. I thought about the fact that I was sitting alone in my kitchen with cancer. Having been robbed by the person I trusted most in the world, I won't pretend that didn't break something in me. It did. But here's the thing about being broken, and this is the thing I most want you to hear. If you're going through something like this, broken doesn't mean destroyed. A drainage system can fracture and still redirect the flow. A bridge can take more load than it was rated for, and hold. I had spent 34 years calculating what structures could withstand. I just had to trust that I'd built myself at least as well as anything I'd ever designed. And I had Patricia, who, while I was in treatment, was quietly building a case that would eventually land on 3 different desks: our divorce attorney, the district attorney's office, and the Ohio Department of Revenue. The divorce proceedings began in January. Deborah retained an attorney in Florida, where she was apparently now residing with the Nashville man. Her attorney opened negotiations with the position that the marriage had simply run its course and that Deborah was entitled to an equitable split of marital assets. Her attorney did not yet know what Patricia had found. Our attorney, a woman named Sandra, who had been recommended to me by a colleague and who had, within the first 15 minutes of our meeting, identified 4 different angles of attack, disclosed Patricia's findings in the discovery process. Deborah's attorney asked for a week to confer with his client. The call came back in 4 days. Deborah wanted to negotiate. Of course she did. Here's what the discovery documents showed. Laid out in Patricia's neat, indexed format. First, the $187. 0 wire transfer. Made unilaterally from the joint account. Met the legal definition of dissipation of marital assets under Ohio law, meaning a court would factor it against Deborah's share in the settlement. Second, the $90. 000 home equity loan, taken with a forged signature, was not just a marital asset issue. It was fraud. Specifically, mortgage fraud. The handwriting expert's report was attached as Exhibit C. Third, the 19 months of systematic cash withdrawals totaling approximately $31. 000 were documented with enough specificity to trace the pattern. Fourth, the fraudulent tax deductions had already been referred to the Ohio Department of Revenue. That referral was Exhibit F. The total financial picture wasn't $187. 0 in a wire transfer. It was, as Patricia had calculated, somewhere north of $308. 000 when you added the HELOC fraud, the cash withdrawals, and the tax fraud estimate that Deborah had extracted, diverted, or fraudulently obtained from our joint financial life over a period of approximately 22 months. I want to be clear, I didn't feel triumphant sitting across a table from Sandra while she walked me through these numbers. I felt tired. I felt sick, literally, because I was still in treatment. And I felt something I can only describe as a deep, structural sadness. Not for Deborah. For the version of my life I'd believed in, which had turned out to be less solid than I'd calculated. But Patricia hadn't finished. This is the part of the story that I didn't even know was happening while it was happening, because Patricia didn't tell me. She told me later. After the settlement, when I asked her why she'd kept it from me, she said, "Because you were sick, and I needed you focused on getting better." Not on what I was doing in the kitchen at 11 at night. What she was doing at 11 at night was tracing the Nashville man. Specifically, she was looking at the financial advisory practice he operated and the relationship between his client accounts and the money that Deborah had funneled into their joint account. Patricia had contacts in financial regulatory circles from her decades of forensic work. She made some calls. She shared some data within appropriate legal limits with a former colleague who now worked at the SEC. The Nashville man had been doing to Deborah, in certain respects, what Deborah had done to me. He had been using her funds, including the money she'd taken from our marriage, as part of a pool he was managing in ways that did not align with his client disclosures. He had, apparently, done this with previous women as well. He was charming and convincing, and he wore expensive clothes, and he told people what they wanted to hear. He was also, by the time Patricia's former colleague finished pulling on the thread she'd identified, the subject of a regulatory inquiry. I'm not going to claim credit for that outcome. Patricia's contact is the one who pulled the thread. The regulatory body is the one that investigated. I just had the good fortune of having a sister who, when she started following the money, didn't stop until she found where it actually went. By June, I was in remission. By August, the divorce settlement had been finalized. I won't give you the specific terms. Sandra asked me to keep those private, but I will tell you that the settlement accounted for the dissipated assets, the home equity fraud, the tax liability, and a range of other factors that Patricia's documentation made possible to address. I kept the house. I kept the equity in the house. The HELOC fraud was handled as part of the criminal referral, separately from the civil settlement. I will also tell you that the mortgage fraud referral, the forged signature on the home equity loan, resulted in criminal charges being filed against Deborah in Ohio. Those proceedings are still ongoing as of this recording, and I've been advised not to discuss the specifics. But the referral happened. The charges are real. And the handwriting expert's report, which Patricia organized, initiated, and paid for out of her own pocket without telling me, is Exhibit C. There is one more thing I want to tell you about. And it's the thing I think about most when I think about this whole experience. 3 days before my last chemotherapy infusion, Patricia came over for dinner. She'd driven from Lexington, which takes about an hour and 40 minutes each way. And she did it on a Tuesday night because I'd mentioned in passing that I was a little nervous about the final round. She made the drive. She showed up at my door with a container of the tomato soup. She knows I like the kind from the Italian place near her house, not the canned stuff, and we sat at my kitchen table and ate soup and didn't talk about the case or the divorce or the cancer. We talked about our parents, about the house we grew up in, about a camping trip we took when I was 10 and she was 13 and the tent collapsed in the middle of the night and our father couldn't figure out how to put it back up and our mother laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. We talked about the things that don't go anywhere, the things that hold, and I thought about what I'd told Patricia when she first arrived at my house back in October. With her laptop and her external hard drive and her rolling suitcase, I told her I was scared. Not specifically of the cancer or of Deborah, just scared in a general, foundational way. The way you're scared when something you built your stability on turns out not to have been what you thought it was. She said, "You're not building on that foundation anymore. You're building on a different one." I thought about that a lot during treatment. Every time I sat in the chair and felt the medication moving through me and thought about what my body was doing fighting. Quietly. Without drama, I thought about foundations. About what holds. About what you build on when the original ground turns out not to have been solid. Patricia held. The 17 friends who showed up with food. And company. And rides to appointments when Patricia couldn't make it, they held. The community I didn't know I had until I needed it that held, and maybe most importantly, I held, even when I didn't feel like I was holding. Even on the nights at 2 a.m. in the kitchen when I wasn't sure I was. The structure held. I'm not going to tell you I've forgiven Deborah. I don't know if I'll get there. I've thought about it, about what forgiveness actually means for me. What it would require. Whether it's something I want, I don't have a clean answer. I'm not sure this kind of story gets a clean answer. What I can tell you is that I'm in remission. That my house is mine. That the legal and financial consequences of what Deborah did are being addressed by systems that exist precisely to address them. That the Nashville man is facing his own reckoning in a completely separate context that has nothing to do with me. And that on the first warm Saturday in September, I went out to the garage and changed the oil on my truck. Hands covered in oil. The ordinary weight of an ordinary task. The whole world feeling. For a moment, like it was exactly where it was supposed to be. Before and after. I'm in the after now. If you're going through something like this, if you're sitting in your kitchen at 2 a.m. wondering whether you're going to hold, I want you to know that the structure is more solid than it feels in that moment. And I want you to know that somewhere in your life, there is probably a Patricia, someone who will drive an hour and 40 minutes on a Tuesday night with a container of tomato soup because you mentioned in passing that you were a little scared. Let them show up. That's the only advice I have. If stories like this mean something to you, real people, real consequences, real love, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Every comment, every subscription, every share tells us that these stories matter. And they do. To everyone who stayed, thank you. To everyone who left thinking I wouldn't notice, wouldn't survive, wouldn't rebuild you, underestimated me. Again, I'm an engineer. We account for every variable. We don't cut corners. We build things that hold. And this one is holding